Welcome, 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 friends. This week's Griscom stream. Hope that you're doing good wherever you're at. Apologies for missing it yesterday, but been dealing with a lot of stuff, as you might assume, with this pretty bad ice storm that we've had here in the Austin area. I hope folks who are local, who are listeners, got your power back and are warm. I know it's been tough. I mean, I've been pretty lucky. I had some trees fall around and cause some issues, but I've had power the whole time. But a significant portion of my family's been without power for days now. So um, you know thinking of everyone and out there who's still waiting to get electricity. Really really rough stuff. I mean, it's tough because this is the kind of thing that's going to happen if you don't have like real serious infrastructure investment. And like, you can say a lot about the city government here and things that could have been done better, but without real serious uh, funding, and I think at this moment that kind of thing is going to have to come from the federal level. Just knowing how bankrupted most municipalities and local governments have been across the country, but especially here in Texas. It just hasn't been more clear to me that we need like a very serious prolonged federal investment in our infrastructure and weatherizing our communities, and building up some kind of form of public power. Because electricity is absolutely critical, and you forget sometimes how critical it is, because it's something that most people take for granted. And it's a tough reminder that these systems can be very fragile, and without building up the infrastructure that we need, as weather events do get more chaotic. um, things are rough. And just like really quick, and this is a personal prerogative, I know that everyone likes to like roast on Texas and Texans, by saying things like, oh, it's not that cold there, it's been colder wherever I'm from. It's like, what happened here just like recently is that you had a prolonged period of time where the weather was like 60 degrees, and then you get a cold snap and it goes below freezing. It had been raining a lot, so all those trees then get up, accumulate a lot of water that then freezes, that then thaws, and then freezes again, meaning that there's more and more weight on these trees. And that's what ended up causing the power failure here, is that trees across the hill country area were falling over um, and hitting power lines. And we have a lot of power lines in different parts of the city that are still above ground. So anyways, there's things that can be done, but it's not because people are babies and don't know how to survive 30-degree weather. It's a bit more serious than that. But folks, welcome to the Griscom stream. Always happy to take questions. I'm always happy to talk about whatever's on y'all's mind. um I know there's a few topics I want to talk a little bit about. A pretty auspicious anniversary that we just hit here in the state of Texas. I definitely want to talk about Ilhan Omar, and we'll definitely talk a bit about this socialist denunciation by the House Republicans, joined by over 100 House Democrats as well. And just really quick, on next Tuesday's show, I'm really excited. We're going to be having a Madison Hilly on the program, who is with the Green Nuclear Deal, to talk about the progressive case for nuclear power. I'm really excited to have her on. She's an excellent communicator and really knows her stuff. So that's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. And then this weekend for patrons, and you can always sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We got the video from our live show in New York City. So if you weren't there and you want to see what was happening, sign up now. You can get access to that this weekend. And if you were there, you get to relive it. We had a really good time. It was fun taking a little peek back on the video, because for us, like on stage, like it flies by. So we needed to watch it again to sort of remember everything that happened. So you'll definitely want to grab that as soon as you can. Hopefully, I'm thinking Saturday we'll put that up. And thank you, Kowalski, for joining up. I always appreciate hearing from you in the super chats. Little Miss Martian says trees are blocking like every other road yesterday. Yeah, and it's crazy because like not only is like our people, I mean like something like 200,000 people here lost power. I mean it's significant. It's cold. People don't have the ability to keep food safe. They're losing food in their homes. And then you also have the added danger of all these street lights are closing down, and people drive like nuts typically. But a lot of people don't even know that like when you see a stoplight that's not working, you're supposed to treat that as a four-way stop sign. And I was driving around. I've been driving around the past couple days, trying to get to different folks and stuff, and like um, it's just amazing to me to see the kind of lack of care that some drivers have, and in a situation like that, where like you need to be a little calm and go with the flow and treat it like a four-way stop sign. People are just barreling through. There's been a few traffic deaths because of that. So if you're in the area, remember that. Um, Michael Reich says we need to graft Texas onto the national power grid. Most of the petroleum processing is there; they can't just go dark. Yeah, but again, like the power problems here aren't. It's not been a grid failure. There's been failures in pricing and things like that. But the reason power's out here is literally because trees were falling over power lines, and I think it's important to understand the facts, so we're not just sort of reading about things. We need to fix our grid. The grid's still broken. The grid still has tremendous amounts of issues, but this is literally an infrastructure question about how much money we can invest in doing things like trying to put more of these wires underground, trying to invest to weatherize systems so that they can survive something like a cold snap. Because it's not like ice storms are particularly rare here. That's something that happens most years. But the thing is, this one was quite severe. And a lot of conditions, not only was there a lot of water that froze and became ice on trees, weighing them down, also it was like a prolonged drought, so a lot of those trees were really brittle, which made it really easy to do. And Zane says, yeah, the privatized grids in Texas are causing this. Yeah, and no, it's not the privatized grids that have caused the power failures. It's much more. Um, it's the trees are falling over power lines. Again, I think that we need to fix our grid, and we need to deprivatize the Texas power grid 100%. I think it's one of the most critical fights that we have here in this state. But it's important to be accurate too. The grid didn't fail in the sense of like power outages. Blackouts coming from failure to produce electricity. Literally, lines went down, so you couldn't get electricity to different houses. And there's a lot of confusion. I mean, like my family, multiple members of my family have been without power for the past 3 days, and they're struggling to get good information from the city. You're also seeing things where entire blocks will have like a crew working on them, and then the crew will leave, and like maybe 50% of the block has power and the other one doesn't. So there's still like a tremendous amount of confusion, and I'm sure there'll be much more investigation as to the causes of the crisis. But on the macro level, it's just across the board in this country, we have to be investing in our infrastructure and being able to create electrical systems that can weather extreme weather as that becomes something that's more frequent. And two, like if you're out here, as little Miss Martian says, like I almost got hit by a fallen tree twice yesterday. Like, be really smart, because those trees were just if you're ever in a situation like that again, like they'll go down like that, and if you can avoid driving underneath a branch that's precariously hovering over the road, it's probably a good idea to get out of the way. But let's see, y'all. We'll get to the bottom here, and then we can take some more questions and talk about a couple of these stories that I know we're all sort of getting ready to get into. Aaron says we need to nationalize the electrical grid and get private companies out of the picture. I mean, I totally agree. I think what we should be doing, and people should read the work of Fred Stafford and Matt Huber on this, is like, look to institutions like the Tennessee Valley Authority. I think we need to be building up Tennessee Valley Authority style systems all across the country that have double mandates: one to produce electricity, but also to produce electricity cheaply for working people. Because as what happened here after the winter storm couple years back, people, who did have power were then getting hit with, monstrously high bills, while people who own those facilities, walked away with with the lottery ticket. Building up large scale industrial power generating systems like the TVA is something that we desperately need. One, just on a practical level of like trying to lower the cost of living for working people, and two, on the level of trying to deal with the climate crisis and trying to get low carbon forms of energy production like nuclear power up and running for folks. Something we desperately need much more of, and I think. um, I think that this too is like one thing for like socialists. Like this is something that is so visceral and something that people understand, like the need for electricity, to be cheap. That like this is an avenue, much like a Medicare for all kind of thing, that can really speak to people and makes our arguments very clear, right? Like Medicare for all, very clear. Private companies, preventing people from getting necessary treatments, and then if you get those treatments, bankrupting people is a system that we don't need. It doesn't work for us. Private electricity systems do the same kind of thing, and these are things that should be brought under public control. We have a question here from what you can do. Says appreciate the super chat. Says, love the show. What's your opinion on contacting your representative to push them to endorse left policy? I mean, I think that that's something that can be very viable. I mean, across the board, if representatives know that there's people out in the community who are watching their votes on certain things, that they're that there's expectations of them to act in a certain way, that's something that's worthwhile. I think the most effective though is if you're doing that as part of a coalition or a group, right? I don't think it's wrong to necessarily do it individually, but a larger scale strategy of pressure on congressional representatives like that stuff has like a lot of value. And like, look, we know like what the Democratic Party is. We know where their positions are. But look at what happened, for example, with Brazil. Michael was not alone in this, but Michael Brooks made that a very big issue um, with like left progressive folks in this country. And you started to see things shift a lot with elected Democratic Party representatives because they were being asked about Lula. They were being asked about Brazil, so they had this understanding that there were people out there who were watching them and expecting them to act in a certain way, and that had effects in the way that, for example, in the most recent election, the United States posture to Bolsonaro's attempts to deny the election results. That was a very, very different experience than what happened initially when Lula was falsely imprisoned, right? So, there's value in that for sure. And hell yeah from Jules. And appreciate the super chat as well. Shout out to the United Kingdom and French strikers. Yeah, what was happening in France was really exciting, and seeing these continued pushes with critical industries in the United Kingdom has been tremendously exciting. And like I was talking with some friends the other day, like Mick Lynch has been doing such a great job as a communicator and really showing that despite some of the anxieties that we might think that like if people see services being interrupted by striking workers, they might turn their backs on them. The UK is a country that has been controlled by the right wing for a while, and even there there's been tremendous supports for striking workers. So it's been something that's been incredibly encouraging, I think. Yeah. And our friend, congressional baseball fan, says it's wild to think of how many power lines are still on wood poles around the United States. Burying the line seems like a smart policy move. Here in Phoenix, the summer monsoon storms take them out all the time. Totally, but the problem is funding, and like local governments in this country are really cash strapped, and it's by design. And we need to have a kind of federal funding for these kind of things, but 100%. Um, um, things that are desperately needed. Well, I'm going to get to some of these stories, y'all, but I want to make sure, I'll definitely be answering questions as we go. I'll answer this one too. Ian says, other than sports, what sorts of hobbies or popular culture things do you enjoy? I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with this stuff. I mean, the two big things for me is I love going to the honky tonk. I love going out dancing. I love barbecuing. I like fishing. I like hiking. I don't know. I mean, I play games too. Um, don't talk about that as much on the show. And here's another one too. Maha says, Griscom plays guitar, right? Do you write your own songs? Yeah. I mean, I play guitar. I play a little banjo. Back in the day, man, I used to play a lot. I used to write a lot. You know, my fiance and we actually met because I tried to start a band um, back in the day, about 10 years ago, and the band didn't work out, but we did. But I've been trying to get back into playing more. I don't think anything serious, like trying to play a show or anything like that, but it's fun as hell. I mean, like I think like any kind of hobby like that, like music, can be really nice to be able to have something that takes some time, to learn, and you can always be perfecting. I think it's good for the soul to have things like that to work on. And the band was called Adam. It's good to hear from you, friend. The band again didn't really take off, but the name was Dogwood Blue. Um, but yeah, folks, I'm going to take more questions, so don't stop asking them in here. But I want to talk about two things before we get to this vote in Congress about socialism. The first one is just a reminder of a story that I've been harping on for a long ass time, which has been our governor here in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott's COVID policies, and it's one of those stories that like is a little um, you know, convoluted, and it can be a little technical. So sometimes folks miss it. But Greg Abbott, we just celebrated last week 1,050 days under a COVID-19 disaster declaration. And, it's one of those things that when I remind friends and family around here that we're still under COVID disaster declaration, they look at me kind of puzzled because, Texas was a state that early on stopped, you know, state policy really in trying to do much about COVID. But what Greg Abbott has been able to do through this disaster declaration has been to concentrate power in ways that aren't outlined in the Constitution of Texas. Like the disaster declaration ability of the governor is basically so that the governor can react quickly to a crisis like a hurricane or earthquake or some kind of natural disaster, so that they can quickly rally up and deploy resources into areas that need them. And that power gives them a lot of executive authority. And again, for people who aren't familiar with Texas's form of government, we have what you could call a weak governor system, where the governor isn't really supposed to be like the center of power. For example, like the governor of Texas doesn't have like a direct cabinet in the way that a lot of other states do. Most of the kind of equivalent things to cabinet level positions on the state level in Texas are things that are controlled by boards, so multiple members, and the governor is able to put people up there, but on a staggered level. And the idea, every couple of years is able to put somebody on one of those boards. And the idea behind that was that they didn't want to have centralized power for the executive in the state of Texas. And, you can disagree with that or not, but that's the system here. Greg Abbott has completely flipped that. He's been able to flip it, one, because the Democratic Party here has just shown themselves to be completely incompetent in their ability to unseat Republicans over the past 3 decades. And because Abbott is willing to push the law to such an extreme, because the only other kind of checks on his power are going to be members of the GOP legislature, Abbott has basically been able to push the law beyond what would be typical or what would be open to, for example, like if Beto O'Rourke was to win, he wouldn't be able to enjoy the same kind of power and concentration of authority as Greg Abbott has. And lastly, Abbott has been using the COVID-19, declaration to concentrate power, and he's done this to, first overrule cities and localities that were trying to implement, any kind of basic COVID protections, but it's had a wide sweeping use. So, for example, a lot of Greg Abbott's border policy cites COVID-19 as a legal justification for why he's doing things like when he shut down trade with Mexico, doing things like Operation Lone Star. COVID-19 is often cited there. In fact, Abbott has pulled money from federal COVID funds to fund his border operations. And again, like it's a story I get why people miss it because it's a little wonky, but it's absolutely it's anti-democratic. It's extremely worrying to see somebody like Abbott be able to use this so effectively without a lot of public understanding or awareness of what he's doing. And he continues to extend the disaster declaration, is continuing to utilize those powers, not just to prevent, policy to maybe mitigate COVID-19, but also to fund and protect him, and all of the other kind of right-wing political theater gambits that he's been going on. And we hit 1,050 days last week under this state of COVID-19 disaster declaration. Most people don't understand it. Most people don't talk about it. And if you want to get stronger understanding of it, I wrote this piece in Jacobin after Beto lost to Greg Abbott, called "Greg Abbott is Texas's most powerful governor ever. That's bad for working people." And in that, I really break down. The system. So if you want any more information on that, check that out. And like the last thing I'll say on this before I go back to checking out the chat is that it's endlessly frustrating to me because you saw these kind of like non-traditional critiques from people on the left of COVID-19 policy. I'm not trying to wade into those waters again, right? I actually think it's a very reasonable question to ask about where government gets its authority from, and to always sort of be watching, governments. We know governments from here in the state of Texas to in states like New York and California are very much hostile to working class people and working class interests. So even if the government is doing something that, you might support, I think it's a very reasonable question as somebody who believes in democracy, somebody who's worried about working class power, to like sort of question and investigate, okay, where's the government getting their authority? Are they overstepping, their mandate? And you saw a lot of kind of like, more outside the box critiques from some members of the left about COVID-19 policy around us. One thing that was really frustrating to me about a lot of those critics, though, was that when I would bring up, for example, what was happening here, they weren't interested in it. It was very much, they were much more interested in vaccine mandates, mask mandates, etc., in states like New York, in states like California. When in a state like Texas is utilizing the same things that you're criticizing in a New York or California, but to do things like banning mask mandates or banning vaccine mandates, banning basic COVID-19 protection protocols. There was virtual silence from that section of people. And I found it to be something that was really frustrating, because now if you look at it, the kind of story that was being told by people like that, who were saying, well, the governor of New York, the governor of California, mayors of all these larger cities are going to utilize this to basically, concentrate their power. And you look at the state that has done it the most successfully, it's been the state of Texas. And all of those people have been very, very silent or uninterested in covering that. So anyway, that's my little hobby horse. But let me go to the chat, make sure I'm not missing any questions, and then let's talk a little bit about this Democratic Party vote with the Republicans on socialism. And we'll get to that in just a second. Luke says, how did the Democrats denounce socialism? They all signed on to vote. Not all of them, 109 of them voted with the Republicans in the House to condemn socialism. All right, let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Shahir says, weak governor is a relic of Reconstruction. Yeah, I mean, most of the kind of feelings there were about centralized power, once Texas got back into the Union. And all right, let's talk about this story then. We have a question to get us started. Amy B123 says, has the House ever had everyone vote to denounce fascism in the past? I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'd be surprised. And yeah, so just here's the story for folks. I'm curious what y'all think, so jump in the chat with any kind of questions or thoughts you have about this. But yesterday, the House voted to denounce socialism, denouncing the horrors of socialism in a text that was just extremely reactionary, extremely right wing. I mean, filled with all of the kind of fascist lies and myths about socialist countries in the past, saying that socialism has the blood of 100 million people on their hands. I mean, really, really frightening and typical kind of fascist right wing rhetoric about socialism, stuff that is just not at all reflective of history. It also goes on to cite Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, obviously a slave owner, as justification, to denounce socialism. And there's a couple things that I think are worth noting here, right? Is one, it's like, okay, I've heard people, and wait, just really quick, just so we're on the same page. So it passed in the House. 328 voted in favor, and 86 people voted no, and 14 voted present. And I'll just pull this up really quick so y'all can see. 109 Democrats voted with the Republicans on this bill, to basically put forward right-wing misinformation. I know y'all probably can't see that super well. Let me make it a little bigger for y'all. Yeah, sorry, it's not really going to work, but I can just read it to y'all if you trust me. 109 Democrats joined with 219 of the Republican colleagues. No Republicans voted against it, and no Republicans voted present. So every Republican who was present in the House voted for this bill, alongside 109 Democrats, led by people like, on the Democratic side, people like in the New Democrat caucus. We also saw, a lot of people who you would expect to sort of take these positions. People like Adam Schiff, people like Hakeem Jeffries, and notably Ro Khanna. And I think that that's somebody who we're going to focus on just a little bit, because I think it was a really telling moment. Now, a lot of people, when this came out, they're like, okay, well, why, the first argument is like, well, this is like a stupid performative bill. It is 100%. There's no doubt about it. It's Republican posturing and chest beating. What does it do materially, policy wise? Nothing. It's just like a statement of the beliefs of the members of the United States House, about a question of something like socialism. Most of the Democrats who voted for it are people who were wildly anti-progressive, and certainly anti-socialist, and people who are the first ones to sprint away whenever they get accused of being a socialist or supporting socialist policies. And the Republicans will call anything a socialist policy. It's been it's been that way for over 100 years in this country. And they're timid and they're scared, and they're also against it ideologically, right? The idea, though, that voting for something like this is going to protect you from that charge is ludicrous. They are going to accuse you of that regardless. So you can only see something like this as a genuine statement of fact about the opinions that are shared between a majority of the Republican Party and a significant block of the Democratic Party. Why is it a big deal, right? Is it a big deal? Well, undoubtedly, this is not something that is going to be reflected in policy. It's not something that's sort of pushing codes of conduct or anything that is immediately a threat to the freedom or ability to participate in a democratic society if you are a socialist. But I'm sorry, friends. I don't know about y'all, but living in a country that in living memory had a Red Scare, blacklisted people, had people like Paul Robeson brought in front of the House of Un-American Activities Committee for the crime of opposing American war, opposing the exploitation of working people, opposing the racism and Jim Crow policies of this country, all under the guise of fighting communism, fighting socialism. I don't know. I take it a little seriously when the U.S. government, starts getting worked up about this kind of thing, because it doesn't take too much before these things go from bills that are just sort of symbolic statements of opinion to things that start to become reflected in policy. And this country has a brutal history of silencing socialists. And just look on another example, you might think that things are in the past, right? And then you see how quickly they can return, right? After gay marriage was legalized after the Supreme Court decision, I feel like a lot of people thought that was sort of a settled question and it was done and we weren't going to go back. Look at the rhetoric from the right wing right now. Look at the wars that they're trying to push, their attacks on trans people, and also their attacks on just homosexuality in general. Right. Sometimes you hear the rhetoric. Sometimes you hear some of the things that are being pushed in state legislatures across this country on when it comes to things like gay marriage, when it comes to things like adoption, when it comes to things like the freedom of human beings to be able to express themselves and their love in whatever way they see fit. It's a throwback. It comes back. It's cyclical. These things are never settled. And if you think for a second that the Republicans and a significant portion of the Democratic Party would never, if they were able to, start to do the same kind of things about pushing Red Scare stuff, attacking socialists, trying to shut down critics of the United States government, of the United States militarism, of capitalism, of the donors for these parties, right? And you think that would never come back again? You are dead wrong. So when you see things like this developing, you should take it seriously. I don't think you should get yourself up into like into a state where you're you're unable to sleep or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But you should see these things as bad development. And as socialism becomes more popular, particularly with young people, as working class people get more and more militant, and fight back, and we have potential for maybe some big strikes in the next year. Don't think that the Republicans won't try to return to that old playbook of trying to shut down a dissent against against capitalism and against American imperialism. So you should take it seriously, and you should also notice the people who are quick to stab you in the back. And Ro Khanna is one of them. Ro Khanna is somebody I've been very worried about for a long time, because Ro Khanna, stood with Bernie and is somebody who describes himself as a progressive capitalist. Tries to always argue. He always argued, for example, that he doesn't really think Bernie's a socialist. Bernie should just start calling himself an FDR Democrat, and drop that label, right? So this is somebody who's trying to be in the movement, who's trying to fundamentally shift what it was that was bringing people to this movement, to water down the kind of ideas, to water down the critique of the wealthy and powerful in this country, to instead of pushing for workers' democracy, for example, in this country, working class power, for American competitiveness, right? And we need some social policies to keep us competitive, right? Definitely better than like a crazy Republican, definitely better than a significant portion of the Democratic Party. But for you to think about being inside this movement, it'd be really dangerous. And I've always been worried about Roe's ability to sort of walk that line, and, for example, maybe being able to try to inherit or direct some of the energy around the Bernie Sanders campaign. So Ro Khanna voted with the Republicans to condemn socialism as a concept, signed on to not only something that just said, I denounce socialism, but utilized some of the most ahistorical, right-wing, fascist lies about socialism. I mean, saying 100 million people have been killed because of socialism is just erroneous, and it's dangerous to even entertain nonsense like that. Well, this is what he put out almost immediately, a couple hours after voting against socialism. Medicare for all, free college and vocational school, living wage, universal childcare are not only just, but are key to economic development, worker mobility, and growth in a free enterprise economy. Let's not cede the economic case for progressive policies to build a governing majority. And then Tyler Hackner, Twitter user, says, then why vote for a crappy resolution? And he jumped in by saying, we need to frame progressive policies as pro-growth and pro-economic development, the way FDR did, or Bismarck. Really bizarre one, I must say, to grab from. It's how we build a majority governing coalition for these common sense policies. Tim Barker, whose work we've cited on this program before, says, Rep. Khanna, are you aware that Bismarck passed a series of anti-socialist laws which banned the meetings, trade unions, and newspapers of a mass democratic socialist party? Rose says, I, of course, don't support those laws. I was just making the point that he understood the connection between a welfare state and economic development. Tim says, do you see anything weird about invoking such an anti-democratic figure as precedent for your politics? History is full of authoritarians who understood the relationship between the welfare state and economic development. Many of them also violently repressed labor in the left. It's a funny pose for you to strike the day after voting for an anti-socialist resolution. It suggests further that you don't object to socialism because it is authoritarian or un-American, since after all, you embrace Bismarck, a foreign authoritarian. You're revealing quite a bit about yourself. And yeah, I think that that Tim makes a really solid point. I mean, the Bismarck thing was a bizarre throwaway things. So we can let those who understand, get into that. But this is a moment that I think is really telling. Like, as we're trying to build, working class movement, as we're trying to build a socialist movement, you see somebody like Rose standing with the Republicans, right? So easily, so willingly, for nothing, for nothing. It's not like he got much out of this, right? This wasn't something that opened up doors for him that didn't exist. This was a genuine expression of how he views politics. And it should be a very, very clear reminder in the future about how quickly, like, if they're willing to turn their backs on us now, right, on a symbolic gesture that doesn't really mean much, what do you think is going to happen? If stuff gets more serious in the sense of right wing attacks on the left and socialists in this country, or if we are ever able to start building significant power and you start to see capital, start to fight and push back against a growing socialist working class movement in this country, where do you think those people are going to stand? They stand with these people today, they will stand with them tomorrow. Just so we're clear too, because there's a lot of people who love pushing misinformation. We've been very critical, for example, about the votes of squad members with the railroad strikes. But there's a lot of people out there who, instead of being able to criticize those members of Congress on their own merits or on reality, always put forward fantastical stories about them. The squad all voted against this right wing attack on working people. Greg Kassar from here in Austin, the San Antonio area, voted against it as well. So there were plenty of people who sort of showed that they're not going to play along with this kind of shit. But I think, remember who voted which way on this one, because this is something that I think was a really, really clear example of how fickle a lot of progressives can be when it comes down to it, when it comes to trying to fight for a better world. But let's get into the chat a bit. I want to make sure that we're bringing our friends in and talking about it. Luke says maybe this is a good thing. Basically, same result as forced the vote would have given us. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good thing. I think that all of these people are folks that we knew where they stood. I think that the Roe thing is really telling. I think a lot of people have been confused about where he stands on these things for a while. So, I mean, in the sense of like, yeah, you can utilize that list to sort of give you a clear understanding of where some people stand. But I don't think it's a good thing. Our good friend Kowalski from Nebraska says, if you use 100 million definition and apply the same critique to capitalism, I think you would end up with almost 400 million, with about 5 million being added every year outside of war. Well, the thing is, like, with that 100 million, I mean, maybe one time it'd be worth it to put this is a straight up like Nazi propaganda number, right? Just so we're clear about where that shit originates. But that number, like it's ridiculous, right? One, it's like it's off of it's ahistorical. It includes the vast majority of deaths, and it also, for example, includes things like abortion um as a death under like a socialist country, right? It's just one of those things that is just like untethered with reality, in such an extreme way that I don't even think like entertaining it in some kind of way is worthwhile. But I think that it's important to understand where these things come from in order to push back against them, because yeah, that's a classic right-wing anti-socialist trope, and it's just not factual. Ian says it is 100% gross. Rokana would vote for it. I totally agree. And yeah, as I was just saying, Ian says, because it's so toothless, there's also zero reason to not vote against it. I totally agree. And MK946 says, it may be posturing and immaterial, but let's remember the history of violence and marginalization of socialists. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I think you should take these kind of developments really seriously. And hell yeah, Valpo says, I'm joining late, but hello from the greater DFW area of Frozen, Texas. I hope all's well down there. I know there are a lot of power outages even now. Yeah, no, we were just talking about that. A lot of people are still waiting for electricity. My family's, multiple members of my family still don't have any power. I hope y'all have been okay up there. I think the tree falling on lines really made it a bit worse down in Central Texas. Aaron says, playing devil's advocate, isn't there a difference between condemning socialism and the horrors of socialism? I mean, no. But even then, like, look at the text. I mean, look what's being cited. Look what's being talked about. It's very clear that it's not like just like a kind of attack on Stalin, for example. It's the entirety of the history of socialist project and socialist movements throughout history. It's not it's not something that you should be comfortable with, sort of saying like, well, I might disagree with that movement or I might disagree with that country's history. um it's a broad sweeping generalization and factually incorrect. Gabriel says Paul Robeson came to Melbourne and with union members. Yeah, no, I mean, if you see, if people who know Left Reckoning and stuff know I'm a huge Paul Robeson fan. You can see him come to Australia, you can see him come to the United Kingdom, and he would always do things like go and sing for the workers, and go stand up and would usually bring their concerns and whatever their fights were to the media because he would get a lot of attention because he was a big international celebrity at the time. Really like incredible to watch some of those old um, clips, especially the Australian ones are really interesting. I think he has like a debate on Australian TV that is really worth watching too if you haven't seen it. And Derek, really appreciate the super chat, friend. Cheers to you. So Mary says, I'd like to hear from a nuclear power supporting leftists about the alternative to fission, fusion, safe, cheap with abundant fuel. People joke, but there's been stupidly insufficient investment. Well, one, we're gonna have Madison Hilly on the program next Tuesday to do the progressive case for nuclear. I mean, like, I'm not necessarily against fusion, but it's one of the things is like we already have the technology right now that we can build up and build out. Fusion still is down the road. I don't know why we would sit around and wait for fusion technology, to be able to be mass produced or something like that, when we could, be building out a safe and plentiful and extremely powerful and effective electric system that provides cheap, clean, and affordable and bountiful electricity to the public. I mean, you'll hear more about the case on Tuesday at the Tuesday main show, but I think the case is as clear as it's ever been right now. I'm still going on the chat. Aaron says, Rose, some really strange stuff going on. Sometimes I can't tell if he's genuinely trying to walk the line between different factions of the Democratic Party or if he's genuinely naive and gullible. I mean, I think truly, I think he expresses his politics actually very clearly. I think his association with Bernie sometimes muddies the water, right? Look, and if that's somebody who's going to vote for Medicare for all, that's great, right? If we get that on there and Roe votes yes, I'm happy with that. But I think it's important, particularly in a time of disorganization, that we have clear eyes about who wants to see these projects develop in a way that's building working class power and building socialist power in this country, and people who are sort of trying to jump onto the popularity of certain policy demands like Medicare for all. Right? I think it's great to have allies. I think that you shouldn't say, for example, that like if we had like a real significant socialist bloc in Congress that we wouldn't work, for example, with like capitalist, progressive capitalist Democrats. But I think it's really important to know where they should be sitting in terms of leadership and coordination of these kind of movements. And I think Roe's really shown, where he's, stands with people and where he'll walk across the aisle and stand with the Republicans to condemn socialism. All right, let's see. Oh, hell yeah. I'm glad that you noticed that one, friend. Municipal Ecology says, I love the Terry Allen album on your shelf. It's the one right there. Yeah, yeah. I love Terry Allen. Terry Allen's probably one of my favorite artists ever. I mean, just like a, not only an incredible, singer, songwriter, performer, but a really incredible sculptor and artist in his own right. I mean, I don't know, probably one of my favorites. I've still never seen him play. I feel bad. I missed him. He was here in Austin like last week or 2 weeks ago, and I didn't find out about the show until day of, so I missed it. But definitely something at the top of my list to try to see Terry Allen live sometime. Um, Amy says a big oof from Rokana. Do you think he knew about that about Bismarck? It's awful he would do something like that. I mean, I mean, this is like, if y'all haven't seen it, we've Matt and I in our reading series, we were doing a lot of stuff on Hall Draper, and we did um, a long text on of his called "The Two Souls of Socialism," and it was the difference between kind of top down and bottom up socialist projects. But I think Hall Draper makes the point very clear, that top down versus bottom up politics is something that occurs even outside of, like, the social struggle. That's like a longer historical fight, and like there's always going to be figures who try to do some level of like social policy from like the top down. Bismarck, one of them, very clearly. And I think that Roe knows about Bismarck. I think Roe, maybe when he invokes him, isn't essentially meaning that he like agrees with Bismarck's waging war on trade unions and socialist parties. But I do think that it shows that Roe is somebody who believes in more of a top down, um, technocratic governance of society versus somebody who really believes in grassroots bottom up. He democracy. This is somebody who thinks what we need to do is we need to get smart people in control of the society, so then smart people, through their wisdom and understanding of the world, can sort of put down the best policies for the people. And I think that, like, fundamentally socialism is about the belief that you think working people should be able to control their lives, not just like, and with that means that working people should live better lives. But that the fundamental engine of like socialist thought and theory is that we believe in democracy. We believe that working people, right now are not free, and that we're fighting for their freedom and their ability to influence and manage the world around them collectively. And a lot of progressives don't share that. They might be horrified by medical debt. They might be horrified by low wages. They might be horrified by a lot of the same things that we are. But when it comes to like this fundamental belief that like everyday people should be the ones calling the shots, they don't share that belief. And I think these are moments where that difference becomes really telling. Yeah, Greg Kassar, is a new rep, from he was former Austin City Council member, and is a congressperson now. That's who I was talking about earlier, if you were curious. All right, let's see. Yeah, and like again, going back to some of this number stuff, Prairie Fire, Kowalski says they counted Soviet casualties during World War II to socialism. It's really stupid. Totally. And this is some good advice from our friend. What you can do, some of you can do, says, by the way, support a great lefty show by hitting that like button. Got a fella in Texas fighting the good fight here. I do appreciate, all the lights and sharing our stuff. I don't know. I don't usually like to talk about this stuff too much, y'all, but YouTube's really coming down hard on lefty progressive media right now. Everyone I've talked about, especially people with like larger channels, have been telling me that they've been experiencing a pretty significant drop in their visibility. We've experienced that as well. So, we won't be able to beat those algorithms and things just on our own, but all the help in supporting it by doing things like liking these videos and sharing them really helps us out a lot, because um, I think YouTube's really trying to push down news and political commentary stuff on the site, like across the board. So we really do need as much help from the viewers as possible to keep being able to do this and reach as many people as possible. Let's see. And thanks, Tim. And Tim says the live show in New York was great. Hope you had a good visit and saw some friends. I did. It was wonderful. It was great seeing Emma, Matt, and Sam in person, seeing Bhaskar again, obviously the rest of the crew up there. And, getting to meet everybody is always such a treat. And, if you all come in late, don't forget that for patrons, and you can sign up at patreon.com/left reckoning, we'll be releasing the full video from our New York City live show, I think tomorrow. So you can sign up there and get access to that and be able to, enjoy the show if you missed it, or if you were there and you want to see it again, it'd be great. What are my thoughts on the China balloon watch 2023? Hilarious. Blinken canceled his trip to China over it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Republican freak out about it is pretty wild when you think comparatively to the kind of aggressiveness of the United States compared to China. I mean, we don't have Chinese military bases off the coast of California or in the Caribbean or anything like that. And obviously China is surrounded by American military bases. I mean, a lot of this is just kind of theater stuff, but it's also worrying, I think, on both sides too, to see that, like, I don't think it's good for the world that the United States and China are continuing to sort of make more and more aggressive overtures against each other. Not saying one side is not saying that the United States hasn't led the charge on that, but it's not a good sign, I think, for for human life, to see that that relationship get even more strained. All right, let's see. And let me make sure I'm not missing. Yeah, no, when we're talking about Bismarck, we're talking about Otto Bismarck, who Ro Khanna was pushed in. Ian asks, are you folks holding any reading groups? What texts are you going through? Well, we're not doing like a reading group in that sense, but we have a reading series. So we've done Rosa Luxemburg, we've done some of the early Marx, we've done Hal Draper, we've done a lot of different folks. We've done Connolly. We've really tried to find different texts from like the Marxist and socialist tradition that are accessible for people to listen to and go along on reading through those texts with us. So if you haven't seen any of our reading series, you can find it on our YouTube. Some of it is on patreon.com/left reckoning for patrons only, but we try to at least get a good section of those out to the public. But we're covering a lot of stuff, and if people have like requests or suggestions, let us know. The only thing that I will say when it comes to suggestions, it's like it's got to be something that we can cover in a period of like an hour. I think like anything longer than that just becomes a little bit difficult to keep everyone's attention and for us to be able to like do a really thorough breakdown of. But so shorter texts are great. We've done Rosa Luxemburg's Reform Revolution, which has been awesome. We have is it three parts of it up right now, and we're gonna have one more. So that's the only one that has been like a multi 4-part series, and I think that one's been really beneficial and useful. But I think that we probably won't do another longer text like that for a little while, just because it's been a big lift. But I think it's been really enjoyable, and I hope that people check those out if you haven't seen them. I know the first one is up already for patrons. I mean, for patrons and for the public too, if you haven't seen it. All right. Adam Freeman says, how long is the live show? I think it's about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that. I could be wrong. I haven't checked the data yet. Okay. I think I'm towards the end here. So let me see. I'll talk about this for a second, and then I want to talk just a bit about Ilhan before I finish up with questions. But Longshot Louis says the left YouTube media needs to consolidate so that we don't burn out all these brilliant voices. I mean, I'm in agreement with you in the general sense. It's just it's exceptionally hard. Like we've all thought about it. We've all taught. Obviously, we're all most of us are friends, um, and it's hard to do everything in a consolidated way. Just the nature of the space and how things get funded. I mean, I'd love to see a model that works. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time, and I just haven't seen anything that has shown to work. To continue getting people, the support that's needed. But I do think that, like, if a model's out there that works, I'd be very happy to participate in that for sure. But let's do one last story here, and it's connected to what's going on with with this vote from the Republican controlled House now about denouncing socialism, and that's the war that's been waged against Ilhan Omar. And there's a really great piece by our friend Branko Marcetic in Jacobin says Ilhan Omar should wear her expulsion from the House Foreign Affairs Committee as a badge of honor. For people who aren't familiar, the Republicans have basically pushed out Ilhan Omar out of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and people are rightfully very upset about that. But a lot of the rhetoric has been about racism and Islamophobia, right? And I don't think that I understand why people are focusing on that and why they're talking about that. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but I think that focusing almost exclusively on that, it can be a bit of a mistake. Why? Because if Ilhan Omar was somebody who was Ilhan Omar is being targeted because she's been a very effective and persuasive critic of empire. She's been a very effective critic of American war crimes. She's been a critic of American intervention, and she's challenging the military-industrial complex and the powers that be. There's no doubt that it makes her an easier target for the right because she is an immigrant, because she is Muslim, because she is Black. So I don't think that shouldn't be a part of the conversation at all. But the reason they are targeting her is because she's effective at challenging the horrors of this country's international behavior. And just looking at a couple of things in the piece here. Branko writes, if you listen to Omar's critics, the Congresswoman is guilty of everything from anti-Semitism to holding a bias against India to secretly doing the bidding of the Muslim Brotherhood. These accusations ought to clue us in what's really going on here. Besides the unique nature of her personal background that's made her a magnet for these and other scurrilous attacks, Omar's made a lot of enemies by using her perch on the Foreign Affairs Committee to bring up thorny questions and criticisms rarely aired in the halls of Congress. Even Matt Gaetz, a congressman on the polar opposite of the political spectrum, felt obliged to acknowledge her effectiveness. And just like looking at some of the accomplishments, some of the reasons she's being targeted. Omar was the first lawmaker to call the 2019 Bolivian coup what it was, something that's still somehow a rare act in Congress. She later called out both the Trump administration's enabling of the coup and helped pressure the Organization of American States from engaging in similar shenanigans in later Bolivian elections. That was incredibly brave and critical stuff that she was doing. The reason Omar is being accused of having an anti-Indian bias is her outspokenness about the human rights abuses of the Indian government under Modi, its its Hindu nationalism project, and its religious discrimination. Sometimes that's involved butting heads with U.S. officials at a time when bipartisan administrations have sought to deepen ties with India, despite the Modi government's transgressions as part of the blob's overriding anti-China project. That's the same for the Saudi establishment. Accuses her of being secretly in cahoots with the Muslim Brotherhood. Omar has said that valuing human rights also means applying the same standards to our friends and our enemies, that the United States should hold all of our allies to the same international standard as our enemies, inherently threatening to the Saudi government, which in large part has depended on the United States government expressively not acting this way. In fact, she said explicitly that we cannot continue to turn a blind eye to repression in Saudi Arabia, given it's ranked among the worst of the human rights offenders, and has, among other things, called out in the hearings Saudi's governments of promotion of Wahhabist ideology and its funding of international terrorism, which is still a heavily taboo subject in the Washington establishment. And like that's as clear as day. That's why she's being that's why they're trying to kick her off the committee. That's why she's being silenced, and that's why she's being targeted, because she's effective, because she's willing to do things that even a lot of progressives are scared of doing to this day, and that's why they're coming at her. And maybe we can put this up for a second. This incredible video, folks, I'm sure remember this. Her with Abrams, a real slime ball and monster. And this is the way that she challenged him in Congress and why she's being attacked today.
I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
On
February, that was not a question. I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February
a witness
8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes
will not
or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
She's so good. That's Ilhan at her best. I know Michael got a kick out of that exchange. And look, I mean, it's not even it's just one of these things that is clear as day. And I think it's important, not to muddy the waters too much. Like, she is 100% an easy target for the Republicans because of the fact that she's an immigrant, because of the fact that she's a woman, because of the fact that she is Black, right? But they're also coming at her because she makes people like Abrams sweat, because she makes America's allies in Saudi Arabia sweat, because she challenges, the brutality in Israel, and is not somebody who is going to rubber stamp the same old bullshit that the United States continues to push forward, and a lot of Democrats are happy to co-sign. So, I think it's important to remember that, and I think it's something that we should take seriously to see what direction. Not that we had any kind of illusions about what it was going to look like, what direction that this right wing and Republican controlled House is going to look like, and what they're going to be doing. But yeah, folks, let me see. I can maybe take one or two more, and then I'm going to run. I'll be back on Tuesday with Madison Hilly talking about nuclear power, and okay, so Christian comes in and says, how does she challenge Israel, David? Look, has Ilhan made votes that we disagree with? Has she taken positions that we disagree with? Yes, but let's not also be stupid here. Ilhan has been somebody who is consistently head and shoulders above any other member of the Democratic Party on these kind of issues, right? Yeah. Is she perfect? We talk about this shit all the time on this program when people step out of line. We talk about the shit when the railroad vote, with some of the weakness at times to standing up against Israel, but it is completely erroneous to act as if Ilhan Omar is somebody who has just rubber stamped every kind of American policy regarding Israel. It is just not. It's not reflective of reality. Look at what happens. There's sometimes like a real big difference between online discourse on this stuff and what actual votes in Congress have been. And I think it's very worthwhile to go and check out, for example, which direction the squad votes on things like military budgets and things like that in this country. Again, is everything that they've done perfect? Is everything that they've done in line with the things that we would like them to do? No. But again, it is really dangerous and incorrect, I think, this tendency that is growing on the left to not operate out of reality, like reflecting what is being done on the whole, and instead finding, okay, here's a place where they've made a mistake. And now I'm going to conflate that with the entirety of what they've produced and done when they're in Congress. Look, this is not a blanket forgiveness or saying that there's no criticism that's valid. There's very valid criticisms of, for example, Ilhan Omar and other members of the squad. But it's very, very incorrect, I think, to fall into this trap of not being able to see somebody like Ilhan as an ally and somebody whose participation in Congress has been a net positive for people who are anti-war, for people who want to see American imperialism weakened, for people who want to see the power that the United States military has over our democracy weakened. Let's be able to criticize people for shit that they do that's out of line and not fall into the trap of just being unaffected by like the reality, because the shit that you hear online oftentimes is just flat out lies. We talked about it a little bit earlier on this program. I was seeing incredible amounts of misinformation that all the squad had voted with the Democratic Party, for example, in condemning socialism in the United States of America. That's just flat out false. They all voted against that resolution, right? And it's not a good tendency to start falling into that, right? I think you have to be able to be critical. I think there's a lot of people who refuse to be critical of the squad, and I think that's wrong. But I also think that it's incorrect to create a false reality or false understanding of what their participation in Congress has looked like. Because, again, while with like very significant criticisms, I mean, I came on here after the railroad vote, and I said that I felt that this entire movement had walked into a dead end, and I still think that. But I also think that it's important not to fall into these traps of, again, like not being able to be affected by reality and what's actually going on, and to see somebody like Ilhan being attacked by the right wing and start to, tell stories to ourselves. It's like, oh, she's a fake progressive, or she doesn't actually have these kind of convictions. So it doesn't matter. That's wrong. When she, for example, does things, supporting Bolivian democracy, that has an effect. That's a positive thing. And we should be able to recognize that while also being able to be critical when they step out of line. But anyways, folks, I appreciate all of y'all so much, and I appreciate the question too from Christian, even if they're upset with me. And looking forward to hearing from y'all in the future. We'll be back on Tuesday with our show on nuclear power, a progressive case for nuclear power, with Madison Hilly. And we got really fun stuff. We got Nando Villa and his co-host Rose of the new podcast, Shoot the Messenger. I hope I'm getting that right. They've been covering Pegasus, which is this really nasty spyware that was very much involved in the attacks against Khashoggi. So they'll be on the show soon. We're going to be doing an episode on Vietnam in the next couple of weeks. I think we're going to be covering some of these things about the Austin Police Department here, which is a pretty harrowing story. Next month in March, we're going to be doing an episode on Reconstruction, which I'm really looking forward to, and a hell of a lot more. So if you like the show, you want to see it continue, please like, subscribe, share the videos, and support us on Patreon, patreon.com/leftreckoning. I appreciate all of y'all, and stay safe. And hopefully if you're in the area that your friends and family who are affected by the power outages get, power soon. Pretty disappointing thing to still have to talk about in the year 2023. But all right, folks, take care, and I'll see you all around.